Next step in splitting crankcases is to roll the engine over like I've done here and remove the belly pan. I taped up the mating surfaces just to give them that little bit more protection, have a 2x4 underneath, although I've heard that you can pretty much let the engine sit on those bolts, on those studs down there, but this is how I've done it, and it's stable enough I'll be able to pull that oil pan off and then access from the bottom. I've just removed the belly pan, loosening all the bolts, and I loosened the oil level sensor because the wire is zip tied along one of the tubes down here. So I just loosened that. It wouldn't really come loose, so I pulled the oil pan off and I just tapped the oil sensor out from underneath and then moved the belly pan aside. And here you go, gasket. Interesting, I have an O-ring stuck in this pan here. I'm going to guess that this O-ring went on the oil filler cap, somehow got dropped down into the engine compartment and ended up in this strainer down here. You never know what you're going to find. Alright, things start getting a little interesting here. If I followed the factory manual step by step, it has you remove every single component, a complete disassembly, which is not what I want to do. All I want to do is clear the way enough to split the cases. So I think what I'm going to do is the oil and water pump has to come out. So you remove the cover with these two Allen heads here. I've already just done that. That exposes this lower sprocket assembly. I'm going to remove this pipe and these connectors. I'm going to remove this 10mm bolt that holds this whole assembly in right here, and then I'm going to see if I can scooch this out. If not, then I'll go ahead and remove this bolt here, this sprocket bolt, so I can remove this chain, at which point I should be able to slide this whole piece out, and hopefully everything else can stay intact. With that bolt off the sprocket, I can now just very gently drop my sprocket down. Now I found that I do need to remove this strainer, because underneath, right in here, is this pipe, which is held down by another Allen head, and this is going to have to come off. That will allow this assembly to slide out. So, cover plate, 10mm bolt here, sprocket head, strainer, and this pipe right down here. That should be enough to get the assembly out. Alright, I just removed the strainer and that drain pipe. It looks like it's a return pipe that brings oil back down to the pan. So now this pump definitely should be able to come out now. Let me drop the phone so I can get a little more wiggles in. There we go. She just broke loose and now lifts straight out. And what do you know? We got some gears down there. Now it's getting interesting. What I've done here is take all these components I just removed underneath the pan and bag them separately. That way I know which bolts go with which component. Otherwise, when I go back to assembling this, I'm going to have no clue which bolt goes where, and I'm likely going to get a bunch of them wrong, even though they might work. So this is going to help me on the reassembly. It's worth the little bit of extra time. I continue to bin up my components in groups, the groups that I'm sort of using for disassembly. Well, now we're at the removing or splitting the crankcase step. There are a whole lot of bolts that go into mating these two crankcase halves together. I'm just going to follow the procedure here. Like with most of the rest, it requests that you loosen very slowly, quarter of a turn until everything's loose, tapping very gently with a soft mallet on the reinforced areas of the crankcase, not on any of the thinner walled areas. And then we should be able to pull it apart. As I go through loosening and removing all these crankcase bolts, I want to point out that if you look really carefully, there's stamps on the crankcase itself that give you the ordering of what bolt to loosen in what order. And then there's also a reverse sequence to reattach, and that's true everywhere. So there's a stamp here, here, here. I'm loosening all these bolts in this order. At this point, I've gone through and I've loosened every bolt. I've done it in the order that the factory manual said to do it and according to the numbers that are stamped on the crankcase. I've got every bolt still sitting in its hole, completely removed and unthreaded. And the procedure now is, the book says, take a soft hammer and go ahead and on one side of the crankcase begin tapping lightly, it says, and make sure that you're tapping in reinforced areas. So I've never done this before. I'm going to start. I'm going to let the camera roll the whole time, and we'll get an idea of what kind of force is really needed to remove this crankcase. I'm guessing it's going to take quite a bit. I mean, the whole mating surface is glued together. So let's see what we get here. And one thing I'm trying not to do is hit the mating surfaces themselves. And I'm also going around. It says hit one side, but I don't really see how hitting one side is going to get this done. I'm pretty sure I've got every single bolt loose. I stopped briefly just to go around one more time and make sure I didn't have anything that was holding me back. I beat on it for a little bit there. Not super hard, but I want to be slow and methodical and very careful. So really the best reinforced areas I have are up here and on this piece here. So I'm just going to keep working this area and see if I can get this thing sort of, at least on this end, to dislodge a little bit. Oh, there we go. There we go. Okay, so this side's pretty good. I think I'll go on the other side now and do the same. So the opposite side over here, this is the side where the oil filter and oil cooler are. There's not a whole lot of good reinforced areas here, and maybe over on this side here. And if I can hit right where these bolts go in, there's some pretty meaty areas as well. I'm also just applying a little bit of lift with my right hand. There we go. Alright, I think we're about 80% dislodged here. And that looks good. Close. Oh, there we go. It was just sticky, is all. Alright, bottom crankcase piece removed. And there we go. At this point, I am pretty well disassembled.